Well, good evening. Let's get underway. Lovely to see everyone here in the room, and a warm welcome to everyone who's joining us online, wherever you are. Great to have you here for our session, which is Global Game Changers. This is Ep 3, Rewriting the Playbook, Women Leading the Future of Sport. And we've got a super evening prepared. I do want to say that we meet, whether online or in person, here on Gadigal land, and I acknowledge all the traditional owners of the lands wherever you're joining us from. We pay respects to their elders past and present, and those who hold the continuing cultural and spiritual connection to country. And I extend that to everyone of Aboriginal, First Nations and Torres Strait Islander descent who are joining us today, wherever you may be. Great to have you here. We've got a wonderful session ahead for you. I've got an all-star panel here to my left, and my name is Steph Brantz, and I'm basically the traffic conductor, so I'm just guiding the conversation. All the expert intel is coming from these four fabulous women. Because, folks, I'm sure you're all aware, women are transforming sport from science to coaching to global event leadership. Join leading researchers, coaches, players, athletes. It's been extraordinary, the growth. And so we're going to hear and explore how women are driving high-performance innovation, shaping major events, and changing the future of sport. We're looking at sports science, we've got biomechanics, we've got coaching, delivery of global tournaments, and how we're rewriting the sport playbook. We're going to look how sport is played, led and studied, and this conversation really is celebrating those leading the charge, breaking barriers and challenging systems, redefining what elite performance looks like. Don't look so nervous, ladies. You are the experts in this space. Now, through collaborations, of course, such as the UTS and Cricket New South Wales partnership, international research in performance science, women are driving innovation in creating a smarter, if you like, a more equitable future for sport, and that's both on and off the field, and that's what we're going to have a look at tonight. Tonight's panel brings together leaders shaping the future of sport, from high-performance coaching and research to representation and governance. And I'm delighted to be able to introduce our expert panel to you. I'm going to chat to them for about 45 minutes or so, but you are going to have the opportunity to also ask your questions. We're going to put up a QR code for our Slido questions. So all you do is scan that, and then you'll see a question panel come up for you. Please feel free to add in any questions you want. Some of them I may be able to drop in during the conversation. I'll keep an eye on them up here. And otherwise, we have a dedicated session at the end to make sure that we answer all the burning questions that you have as well. But right now, let's hear from this stellar panel. Let's start with Leah Poulton on my left. She's the head of female elite cricket at Cricket New South Wales, leading programs that develop the next generation of players and coaches. I'm sure you're aware, a former Australian cricketer and respected sports leader, she's driving change in pathways, performance and participation across the women's game in partnership with UTS and National High Performance Networks. Welcome, Leah Poulton.
Oh, hi. Thanks for having me on.
Next to Leah, Dr. Katie Slattery is a senior lecturer and researcher at UTS specialising in sport and exercise science. Now, her work explores athlete monitoring, performance and wellbeing. She's helped shape global partnerships that bring UTS research to the highest levels of international sport. Dr. Katie Slattery. I've just realised how enormous my picture looks when we go in close up. I've just made you a doctor. Would you like to be one? Samantha D'Souza. She's a director at Women's Sport Australia, communications and strategy professional with more than 15 years' experience across sport, media and culture. Sam's work focuses on representation, on sponsorship and the power of storytelling to drive visibility, advocacy and equity in women's sport. Welcome, Sam. Last but 100% not least, we do have another doctor, Dr. Libby Pickering Rodriguez. Now, Libby's a lecturer and researcher in biomechanics here at UTS, exploring how technology, movement and injury prevention shape high-performance environments. Her work bridges science and sport. It helps create a more inclusive, evidence-based approach that improves training outcomes for athletes at all levels. Welcome, Libby. All right, folks, I've set you up. Now it's your turn to do some talking. And I guess I want to start with each of you perhaps giving us a bit of insight into exactly what it is that you do from your own perspective, where it all started and what that journey was like to get to the amazing places that you hold today. So, Leah, if I start with you, the change in female sport surely cannot be more evident than you reflecting on your own career. How did that bring you to where you are now? And you must be looking at the changes since your own playing days.
Yeah, certainly. Evening, everybody. When I started playing cricket, it was probably a crowd like this. I think I had about this many people come and watch us play when I played for New South Wales and Australia. And you can see, for those in the crowd who follow women's cricket now, it's starkly different. I think the biggest change is how mainstream women's sport is now, and it's so visible. It's easy to follow, it's easy to pick up a newspaper or turn on the TV and see it, but certainly very different to when I started. My first role was as an athlete. I played for New South Wales for about 15 years, and I played for the Australian women's team for about 8. I had a day job, as most people did then. I was a school teacher, so it was very common that all the girls that were in our teams, they'd hold down a day job during the day and then they'd jump into training at night. The commitment was just the same, but yeah, we had a very different balance. When I left being an athlete, that's when I started working in cricket. I've held some different coaching roles in high performance with WBBL, the Australian Pathway, New South Wales team, and my current role is in administration. So I look after elite female cricket in New South Wales. That's the Sydney Sixers, Sydney Thunder, who are competing in the WBBL at the moment. Sixers are going pretty good, Thunder not so good. And our New South Wales pathway as well. So we've got a really big pathway across the state where kids from the age of 13 up participate in our academies. So that's certainly the most fulfilling part of my role, is working with those guys.
Well, you still have a day job, and it's a very impressive one, giving back to the sport and driving high-performance athletes even further. Thank you so much, Leah. Katie, let's talk about your career. You've actually been to the pinnacle with Olympic sport and your work with teams in that space. What was your pathway to high-performance work, and do you remember what sparked your interest in high-performance and research?
No, there was no one moment that sparked my interest. But I suppose if I think back, I was always a little bit competitive as a kid. And I also have always been fascinated by the limits of human performance. So when I was growing up, my heroes were like Robert De Castella and Lisa Ondiki, like some of the best Australian marathon runners. And I would actually, as a kid, watch the marathon. So I think that's where my love for understanding sport and understanding how we can optimise performance came from. And then I suppose the steps along the way were all about learning what I didn't want to do. So I've initially started up with a engineering in environmental engineering degree. I have no idea what that is, and so I'm glad I never started that. I started out in outdoor education, realised that I can't really read a map very well and have no sense of direction. So then I became sort of thought maybe sports science, maybe PE teaching. Then I realised that I was not the best student, so maybe karma's going to come back to me. And so came to the end of my sports science degree, and Aaron, who's here, he said, have you thought about research? Would you like to do an honours degree? And I said, I've got nothing better to do. And it all started there. So since then, I did my PhD in sports science, and then I worked at the New South Wales Institute of Sport, which led to working for Cycling Australia, now Oz Cycling, and that's what took me to the Olympics. And now I'm full circle back at UTS.
Yeah, that's a super journey, Katie, and I love that you say, you know, your opinion might change of what you want to do, and I think that's really important for young women coming through now. You don't have to pick the end game right now. I mean, I started as a freight forwarder, which was an unusual segue out of doing business at university, then became a naturopath when I qualified in health sciences, and then went to media. And my parents are still asking me when I'm going to get a proper job, so that was quite an interesting segue. Sam, you've had a fascinating career already, and I remember when I first met you, hearing the pathways that you took and the different things that you did, and of course your connection with UCLA, because once I dreamed of being a basketballer at UCLA. Didn't have a green card and wasn't good enough, but apart from that, I still really envied the way you spoke about your story, and you are such a fantastic storyteller. How do you tell your own?
Great question. I'm very nervous to do so. I think the main foundation of my own life so far, and I like to think I'm still at the beginning of my life in many ways, is I've always been a deeply curious person, and I credit a lot of that to the family I have. We are travelers, story finders, storytellers. So from childhood, we traveled quite a lot, and I was very involved in everything that I could be at school, from sport to music to art to my studies. Being a huge nerd about history and things like this. And I think the genuine curiosity in other people's stories and where they came from and what their pathway to where they are looked like is something that has truly shaped everywhere that I have been and what I've loved doing so far. And it's taken me around the world. So that curiosity has kind of led to a life of global travel. I studied in the US at UCLA, as Steph mentioned. One of my first dreams in childhood was to be an athlete, and I was a sprinter for many years. I played field hockey, and that sporting community really shaped a lot of what I now credit to be my own professional discipline and my ability to work in teams, because it founded so much of my my love for people and learning how they get through hard moments or understand the way their bodies move and minds work, and that discipline you need to really train. And at UCLA, I worked very closely with the track and field team there as one of their managers, so I saw the ins and outs of what training looked like, as well as kind of navigating my own journey with sport. Ended up running a marathon many years later, if anybody knows, going from training for like 26 seconds to training for 42 kilometers, a little bit of a tricky situation. But being in the heart of Hollywood and in Los Angeles specifically, you can't help but fall in love with or be at least a little bit curious with how people are telling stories. And for me, the most interesting connections were between the people that were telling stories for blockbuster purposes versus telling stories for impact. And I think that's been a really natural now connection between my life, very closely connected to sport. I moved back home during COVID and started working with a company called Act 3. It's a global agency. We work very closely with big brands like Adidas, and our focus is to really tell cultural stories. And it's taken me around the world, from South Africa to Dubai, the US, Europe. I've worked in all different countries and seen how culturally we've connected sport to community. And for me, looking back at my own experience at an all-girls school, which is a really interesting point of privilege to look back at how I was so connected to sport and see the way different cultures encourage this participation today, is a big part of how I feel still curious about the world I'm in. So for me, it's all about curiosity, the global travel I've had, and the experience of community.
Great stuff, Sam. We look forward to hearing more about brand and culture and how important that is in the promotion of women's sport. You did mention how important your family's been. Hello, D'Souza family. I know you're somewhere in this room, so great to have that support here today. Libby, to come to you, part of the cohort, of course, leading the charge in a space that's become absolutely critical to female athletes, and that connection between sport and academia is crucial, but it seems so obvious. I'm also guessing there probably weren't that many women in that space when you started.
Yes, that would be correct. So I came into sports science academia in a similar path to Katie, just following interests more than anything. Came to UTS straight out of high school to do human movement studies, which is now sport and exercise science, because I played sport growing up and wasn't really sure what I wanted to do for a job, but wanted to follow my interests. So got to uni, knew that I didn't want to be a PE teacher, but did the sport and exercise degree, and through that got a tap on the shoulder to potentially pursue an honours degree after that, which I also didn't know what that was, but did that, and got exposure to research, and then thought, hey, I really like research as well, so then continued the PhD. And not long after my PhD, I was lucky enough to get a academic position on staff here at UTS in what is now School of Sport, Exercise and Rehabilitation. And at that time, that was 10 years ago, I was one of 7 staff, and I was the only female in our school at that time. And now it has grown, thankfully. I did the maths before, we're at about 37% females. Our school has grown immensely in general. And yeah, so it definitely has changed a lot in 10 years.
Fantastic stuff, and we'll talk more about exactly where your research led you in a moment. But Leah, I want to come back to you with that sport and academia link, because that outlines perfectly the link between UTS and Cricket New South Wales. What impact are you seeing from this collaboration?
Yeah, I think it's so important in sport to have an open mind and receive information from as many different spaces as possible. If you're not open-minded and exploring different possibilities, you very quickly get overtaken in sport. People will just go straight past you. So innovation, exploring ways to do things differently is really, really important for us. So partnerships are critical, and we have partnerships with other sporting organisations. We've got partnerships with businesses, and a partnership with universities has just been so wonderful to us. We've got a partnership with UTS where the people are just as passionate as we are about women's sport, but they come at it differently. They have expertise that we don't have. So one of the really cool examples of something we're doing at the moment is Project 130, and I know Libby will be able to talk to this far better than I can. But in women's cricket, the fastest bowler is around 125 kilometres an hour. It's Shabnim Ismail, who's playing for Thunder at the moment. But there's a gap between what women are bowling and what men are bowling. And we don't always use men as a yardstick of, oh, men are bowling there, so that's where we want to get to. But I think we know that where we're at, isn't as far as we can go. There's further growth there. So the partnership with UTS is about looking at, well, how can women bowl faster? What sort of training modalities do we need to implement? What should we be focusing on? Should we be focusing on strength or power? Should we be focusing on technique? At what levels, at what ages? What sort of physical profile should we be looking at? All of those things. Now, I know that they're really important. I just don't know how. And that's where I need Libby to help me. So, yeah, the partnership that we have is just really exciting. And when you have young kids walk through the door and you say, hey, this is something that we're doing. Do you want to be a part of this project? You just see their eyes light up and go, oh, wow, is that possible? And this isn't just something that's going to be a huge asset to Cricket New South Wales. This is for the global sporting community. Research like this, there's not enough research on female athletes, full stop, but topics like this, I think, just sort of allow people to think about what's possible.
Yeah, they sure do. Folks, thanks for your questions, both in the room and online. Keep them coming with Slido, and I will promise that we'll get to as many of them as we can when we finished our conversation here. I just want to keep going with that UTS theme, if you like, Katie, because your work sits at that real intersection of research and real-world performance. What new developments are you seeing coming out of your work?
Well, I suppose one really cool thing that we're looking at now is a concept called training quality, where we're looking at not just what training you're doing, but how well you're doing it. And a lot of that came from many different things, but really not wanting to look at training from a single perspective, but really zoom out and have a look at the big picture. So my experience as a physiologist specialist in sports science was to just care about the physical performance. But what we're doing is expanding that and looking at, well, what's happening technically, what's happening tactically, mentally, and from a team cohesion perspective. So I think it sounds sort of simple, but it's one of the new different steps that we're taking with our sports science research at the moment. And building on that, we are leveraging large language models and artificial intelligence to not only capture, I suppose, your traditional training metrics, but drawing in, like, what are coaches saying in their athlete debriefs? What are they saying to their athletes during the training session? And really using that to also build this big picture view of what's happening in every training session.
Yeah, fabulous. And Sam, I'm going to get you to build that big picture in a minute, but while we're on science, Libby, I want to ask you about your work in biomechanics, because of course that gives us a glimpse into the future of sports science. When you hear about Katie talking about technologies, your methodologies, what are you seeing that's redefining how we look at athletes?
Sure. Well, for those of you who may not know, and I don't assume that everyone does know what biomechanics is, biomechanics is basically applying laws of physics to the human body. So we're looking at how and why we move. So we can apply that in a sporting context, looking at technique analysis, or we might look at force profiles and that sort of thing. And I think that something that's biomechanics is having a bit of a moment, if I don't say so myself. And I think that is largely driven by technological advances lately. Biomechanics was traditionally very process heavy, whilst the physiologists take their lactate or their heart rates and get their results straight away. We might go and do a movement analysis, and then there's hours of post-processing later to get accurate joint angles or velocities or whatever. So what's happening now is our old friend AI has come in, and so there is a lot of advancement which is really taking a lot of the hours and grunt work out of analysis. It's making it much more accessible to many different populations within the sporting landscape. Which means that, we can access more data, and then when we, come to conclusions or find trends, it can then be applied in a practical setting as well. Because it's one thing to say, we might find out hypothetically that, fast bowlers should bowl with a straighter front knee, but if they can't then address that in training, because they need to come into the lab to get that assessed, then, it's hard to implement that. So I think that definitely the technological advances lately, especially with AI, pose estimation, and those sorts of things are making it much more accessible, and it means that we can have real world implications.
Sure can, and it's not just about the women working in the space, but creating the best culture environment and high performance environment, I guess, for athletes, and particularly for female athletes, because it's something that we're investing a lot more time and resources into. But Sam, the story needs to be told, otherwise no one knows it's happening. So put on your brand and culture hat. What's critical in making sure that female athletes and the work that these women are doing is being supported and publicised?
I think the answer that a lot of people skirt around when they're asked this question is money, and it's the thing that we all need to talk about more. So I'm sitting next to three incredible academics and professionals who are working day in and day out with the athletes and within the sporting codes, and seeing the hard work and dedication that is going into this. But from a cultural perspective, I hosted a panel recently, and the topic was around this concept of cultural currency and cultural capital, and how do we actually gain that, because it holds such deep value when we look at all the media and stories that we are reading and observing and absorbing today. But the way that we can actually obtain that as storytellers, as brands, as working for companies like Cricket New South Wales, is we actually need money to be able to go and invest in the visibility, invest in the athletes who are standing front and center and performing and working so hard for their teams and their communities. And so that value of women's sport is certainly, I think now, based on the statistics we're seeing and how we've all presented it today, and the investment in research and what's being brought to light, it is becoming much more obvious what the commercial opportunity is, and it's something that we need to be spending a bit more money focusing on. I think I was looking at some data earlier today. I went into deep statistical nerd mode, but this year we're going to surpass something like 2.35 billion in global revenue for women's sports, which is something like a 200% increase or more than what we've seen in the last 2 years. So that type of a figure shows that this is an industry that is not just sitting, on the sidelines as a DEI or a CSR initiative that we need to add to our budget lines when we're talking about brands and big brands or organizations or sporting codes, but it's a growing industry, a very fast growing industry. And if you are commercially minded and you are a smart person in business, you will invest your money in sport, but not just into the stories, but into the research, into the codes, into the actual programming, into the infrastructure, because that's 2.35 billion out of a $500 billion industry, and there's a lot more opportunity where we can grow.
Indeed. I just want to take one of the questions from someone that's put it up through Slido. Women's FIFA World Cup broke so many viewership records. I'm sure that everyone's aware of what an impact that had in 2023. Has the sponsorship money followed? What needs to change for the commercial reality to match community interest? How do you tie those two things together?
I want to talk very carefully about this because the FIFA Women's World Cup was one of the greatest things that happened in the local market. Did everyone go to a match? Did hands raised? I went to several of them as a young athlete. The young 16-year-old athlete inside of me was so touched and emotional, and I think so many people who went, no matter what age or gender you were. I think one of my favorite memories was after the Paris quarterfinal when the quarterfinal against France. We'd beaten them, and I went to a cafe the next morning, and I heard an old man behind me kind of reliving every statistic of the game, and I'd never heard that come from an older man, let alone someone being so excited about a women's international tournament. So the credit to the teams around that, to Football Australia, to everybody that was involved, is so well deserved and so important. It's now 2025, almost 2026. And I think the mistake that we've been making is laying so much emphasis on this one tournament to carry us through several years of legacy thereafter. There are so many more sports. We're talking about cricket today, we're talking about athletics, we're talking about so many different sporting codes in Australia, let alone the world. And the legacy plan after these events, whether we're looking at the UEFA Euro Championships, we're looking at the World Cups, is just as important. And I think what we're seeing still is two pieces that I think are quite interesting and connect to storytelling is one, we still only make up about 10 to 15% of the sponsorship bracket, and that's a $113 billion industry. So in order to continue that growth, we need to see brands that are not just investing in the firework moments like the World Cups and the Euro Championships and the Champions League finals, but we're seeing long-term commitments, whether they're around athletes and SPOMA contracts, whether they're around programming, whether it's around research, and then we're seeing the marketing budget go into investing in that storytelling over longer periods of time. Because I can tell you today, I'm learning things that I wouldn't even see in my lens from a brand perspective that would be deeply interesting to young girls in WA who are just picking up a cricket bat for the first time. And that level of sponsorship needs to start matching between the big moments to the years after.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think my aha moment during the FIFA Women's World Cup was, and the moment I realised that it had actually had a huge cut through, was there was a young lad behind me. It was in a line for coffee, probably not dissimilar to your experience, and he asked his dad, what are the boy Matildas called? Which I thought was kind of cute. But we need to bring the investment in the legacy mould that Sam's talking about down to a granular level, and I think that's starting to happen with initiatives like the all-female level 2 coaching and getting more women driving through into coaching, and that's really breaking new ground. What's driving that shift, Leah?
I think an appetite to do things differently. The level 2 coaching one's a really good one because I think there's lots of great change that's happening in women's sport. Unfortunately, coaching isn't one area that's really kept pace. That breaks my heart to sort of talk about that as a former school teacher and coach, is that women in coaching is really lagging behind. There's certainly not enough female coaches working in women's sport and very few working in men's sport. And the level 2 hadn't really changed too much from when I did it, like 15 years ago. So when I did my level 2, I was the only woman in the course. And then as I sort of popped my head in to see, who's in the course this year, who's in the course this year, it was the same kind of demographic. It was men, and maybe a woman here or there. And then so we sat down and said, well, what's going on here? And the feedback was they didn't think it was for them. When the course got promoted, it was like, well, this is a level 2, and it didn't automatically go, this is a level 2 for women. They just weren't coming through. So putting our thinking caps on, our coaching team said, well, let's run one for women. And then there's no guessing. It's definitely for them. And what do you know? We had about 20 women who signed up within a matter of days. All they needed to know was that it's for them. So I think it's just having an appetite to do things differently and to try things. One of our values at Cricket New South Wales is imagination, and I think that's a really great way to approach a problem, is to go, well, this isn't working. We've done this. This is a tried and tested thing that we're doing on repeat and not getting a different result. How can we do it differently?
And what does that look like if you look across the sporting landscape? How does Australia compare with progress compared to what's happening overseas? Is there things that we can be learning from overseas markets?
Oh, 100%. The good thing is that Australia are in a real leadership position in women's sport, I think. The way that we've led the way in investment in women's sport is something to be really proud of. But as we know in sport, you just can't rest on that. I look at the investment the Australian women's team have had in cricket, Cricket Australia have had in their women's team for so long, and we're definitely the leaders in that space. But then you look over in the Women's Premier League in India, I look at that and I just go, wow, that they just turned it on and decided that they wanted to do that and do it really well. And all of a sudden they've gone from being the second league in the world to the first like a rocket. England are probably another example of that. They probably really lagged behind in women's cricket for a really long time. And somebody somewhere in some boardroom went, we've got to do this better. And sure enough, just like India, things can happen really fast when there's investment. But the good news for us is that I think we are leading. Sports science is one area that I think we really do lead in. I did a study tour to the US a few years back, and it was a really cool experience. We got to go to all these wonderful universities and colleges over there. We went to some professional sporting organisations. We did a lot of baseball because it transfers to cricket quite nicely. But we went in there and said, what can you tell us about this? What can you tell us about that? And they turned around and said to us, well, what can you tell us? We should be learning from you. Australians, like you guys do sports science better than anyone. How can you help? So I think we do come from a position of leadership in so many spaces, but you can't sit on that. You've got to keep moving.
Katie, we do it better than anyone else. Talk to us about the research space. How do you feel that, where do you feel Australia sits in that narrative?
I think we do a lot of things very well, and that's been led from some really strong work done, especially by the Australian Institute of Sport. So pioneers like Chris Gore and Louise Burke, they really started the whole idea of applied sports science research. So looking at what's happening in the real world and trying to answer questions in a really systematic way. And I think we continue to do that really well. And a way that we do that now is by not only thinking how can we look at what's happening on the sporting field, on the track, but also how can we then apply really rigorous research methods to better understand that. And I think that is thanks right now to we've got Professor Franco Impellizzeri in our school, and he's intense, isn't he, Libby? Intense and passionate about, we're going to do something, we're going to do it right, and we're going to get the highest quality answer to our research questions. And I think that is what we are doing better than anyone else in the world at the moment.
Intense and passionate, that's where it's at.
That's right. Intense, passionate, rigorous.
So Libby, if you look at that, how do you see the UTS research in your space contributing to better outcomes, not just in the research field, but for elite athletes?
I think our approach is we're really trying to answer questions that are driven by the real world. So we try not to sit in our academic tower and come up with the questions ourselves. So Leah was talking about our Cricket New South Wales and UTS partnership. And I think one of the great things, we've got multiple different studies going on with Cricket New South Wales from the community level right through to the high performance level. And one thing that we try to do in this partnership, and I know in many others, is that we have co-design with our industry partners. So, it's not me and Katie sitting in a room deciding what Leah needs to do at Cricket New South Wales, but we will meet with our Cricket New South Wales industry partners and ask them what problems do you have, what questions do you have, and then we co-design our research that way. And I think that a really successful way of doing that is embedding postgraduate students in industry, so they then, I guess, have ownership and buy-in at both UTS and the industry partner, and they're the eyes on the ground that can see the everyday problems that we can hopefully contribute to.
Does that help you shape the way you apply your research?
Yeah, definitely. It's one thing to if you think about a biomechanics example, we might find a statistically significant difference in a joint angle for a particular movement, and it might be statistically significant difference in terms of low performers and high performers. But if the difference is a 5-degree joint angle, that might not be practically applicable. Like, can we actually make a 5-degree joint angle change with training? So that's where we, talk to coaches, talk to athletes themselves about, I guess, where do we focus? Because, is there a point in going down a rabbit hole if we can't actually make changes in the real world?
How does that relate when you work with national sporting bodies? And Katie, you've done a lot of work with the national sporting bodies. How does the work at UTS help bridge that? It's not a divide. How does it bring them together?
Well, one way that I've done it is I was actually co-lead on a research project with Dr. Jamie Stanley. So he's based at the South Australian Institute of Sport, and just the power of this co-leadership. So it wasn't, this is a university project, it wasn't, this is an institute project, it was like, we are doing this together. And sort of as Leah alluded to at the beginning, it's sort of like you use each other's strengths. And so what that also does, apart from everything, all the other good stuff that's been said today, is it really helps with whatever you find to be implemented in practice. Because the worst thing ever is to do this huge research project and it just to be in a journal paper or sit on the shelf in a thesis. So what happens now is, so we've done a lot of work with just trying to figure out, like, how do we work better together as interdisciplinary teams, and how do we work better to support athletes? And now those findings, because he's continuing to work with coaches and a range of coaches and has strong connections in the physiology network, so we've got institutes in New South Wales, Queensland, everywhere. And so what he does is, oh, hey guys, have you heard of this? This is what we're doing. And coaches say, I really need help with this. And he's like, I've got something that might help you. So I think without that strong partnership and joint ownership, for one, we wouldn't have had the research quality behind the findings that we had, and then we wouldn't have this strong implementation that we're hoping to see continue.
We've heard from both you and Libby about the asking the questions, and Sam, you like getting the answers. So talk to us about something else that magic word, partnerships. Where does sponsorship and partnership fit in women's sport? What shifts are you seeing in investments in brands, in athletes, in the work on and off the field?
I think, as I said before, it's such an amazingly large industry, this global sporting industry we have. And when you look at the growth in how much acceleration has taken place in the last couple of years, particularly with the big firework moments we've spoken about before. One of the big shifts that I think is really important is that a lot of brands that you wouldn't have expected to be enlightened by women's sport are waking up. So you're seeing more financial companies investing, crypto companies investing in women's sporting teams. You're seeing Cadbury investing in women's sporting teams and building some of the longest partnerships that we're seeing. You're seeing Charlotte Tilbury makeup and skincare and beauty brands go after the F1 Academy. And there are so many really beautiful case studies, especially in the last year, of where bigger brands are sponsoring teams. I think one of the most crucial differences to see is how much more widespread we're seeing specific athlete contracts change. So I'm sure people have heard the name Caitlin Clark in the last year. She had the biggest WNBA contract signed by Nike in the last several years, the biggest ever for a woman. And this is a company that historically, when you think about back in the days of Alison Felix, who I used to watch on the screen growing up, who actually left Nike because they didn't have a maternity contract for her and were threatening to not re-sign her when she got pregnant. There are major shifts among big brands that are being made in this space, not only sponsoring and taking care of their female athletes, but prioritizing lots of different teams and sports. Now, I think there's a lot of room to grow. As I've mentioned before, there's huge financial opportunity for big brands to get involved in the space, but that's not to discredit the work that has been done thus far. I think one of the other shifts that's being seen, but is a bit of an untapped opportunity here, is we're going after the commercial opportunities of these big moments. So I mentioned World Cups. I mentioned, the big WNBA athletes that we're seeing coming out of big universities. But then let's talk about it from a local context. I think they're estimating, the Office for Women and Girls in Sport in Victoria did some research, I think back in 2023. This is an office, by the way, that has recently been defunded in the latest budget from the Victorian government. So they're no longer investing in this space for women in some areas, which is deeply disappointing. But this is going to be, in the next 15 years, a $49 billion industry in Australia. So it's growing rapidly on our home turf. But at the same time, we're seeing the highest rates of women and girls dropping out of sport in their teenage years than ever before. So something like 60% of girls after 15 years old are actually stopping participation. Forget about elite athletes or pursuing a career in sports. So when I'm a brand and I'm thinking from the commercial lens of how should I start sponsoring teams, what is the impact going to be in that? It's not just about the return, which is also high. It's almost 7 times the return for every dollar that is spent on women's sport. So it's a really great financial investment for a lot of big brands, and big brands are waking up to that and they're seeing the natural growth. But it's also about thinking about that longer term effect on the grassroots. And I think that's something, at Women's Sport Australia we've been talking about a lot this year, is that girl sitting in regional New South Wales, in WA, in Tasmania, who is thinking about never touching a football again because she, for whatever reason, body image issues, infrastructure's not built for her, and so on and so forth. These big brands have such a power to impact that community of people from everywhere between the grassroots to the elite level. And I think as that opportunity presents itself even more, and we start telling the stories behind, the research that you're doing in biomechanics and what it takes to be an athlete, the cognitive impacts of participating in sport, the brands that are getting it right are the brands that are involving themselves and creating the stories that will hit those grassroots programs. So there is a bit of a shift. People are investing more dollars, but there's more, and there's more beneath the iceberg of what's the most kind of sexy and commercial thing today.
So if you cast your mind in the future and we look at strategic storytelling, increasing visibility, participation, leadership, potentially funding, as you mentioned, which cultural or strategic changes do you think would create the biggest changes?
Kind of lifting off what I just mentioned before, if we're talking about the funding aspect of that, I think it's learning to tell the commercial story, which is what I've just mentioned. So again, and I've worked with several brands where this has been the case, or we've all seen organizations where it's been the case, that women's sport is within the corporate social responsibility line of their budgets. It's not a strong investment that people are making a case for. Now a case is being made for it. And if you read any article in the last 6 to 12 months about the growth of women's sport, the number one thing they'll say in regards to changing how we're funding it is telling the strategic story to the people who are going to fund it. So that is a type of storytelling in itself that I think is deeply important, less emotional and cool and not the stuff that I love doing, but it is really important because it's going to have the impact. From a participation lens, I think there is there's a bit of a change between what can I see and will help me believe that I can be there, and who is the best person to represent that when I see it, I can believe it mentality. And I think what we've relied on for several years is heroing the once-in-a-lifetime athletes. When I was a kid, I watched Sally Pearson when she won the 100-meter hurdles and broke the record in London, and that was one of my favorite clips to rewatch over and over and over again. But it was equally as important that I saw a coach, like you were talking about, Leah, coaches who were representing me, who looked like me, whose stories were being told to me, who were telling me their stories, and understanding that that was reachable and that was possible. And I think that's a strategic shift, again, that a lot of organizations can make, is as important as it is to tell the story of the heroes and the idols. They're in the less than 1% category of people who are achieving it and making it. And from the stats I've just talked about, there's so many benefits of us just playing in sport. I'm an ex-athlete, but it didn't become my career, but it's still deeply important to me. So we need to tell the stories of the grassroots, of the women and girls who feel reachable and feel like someone that, you know, you or I could have been when we were 10, 15, 20, 21 years old. Even today, I need a mentor or somebody who's I'm going to look at and help me feel that I can run a marathon. So I think that is a strategic shift that we need to make, is prioritizing the gap between the grassroots and the elite, and that will make a big difference.
My challenge to you, if you choose to accept it, is find someone that makes me feel like I can run a marathon. I'll be keen to see if that exists. In your travels around the world, who do you think does women's sport well, Sam?
In terms of countries? It's a great question. I do think Australia does an amazing job. I think there's a lot more to do. I have been, I'd say, particularly inspired by what's happening in Europe, particularly around big tournaments like the UEFA Women's Euro. There were a lot of attendance records broken in this last year in the 2025 tournament, but particularly the energy that rallied around it. You know, just little things that I thought were really smart. Every traffic light in Switzerland was changed to a woman kicking a football. We're seeing so many more examples of the big organizations. I was in Lisbon during the Champions League final for the women's UEFA Champions League final, and the UEFA hosted a business case for women's football. And I think getting the top leaders of the world in football together around this tournament at that time to have these conversations, a lot of the panelists were actually men who are working in this industry. I think that just shows a deep commitment there. So internationally, that's been quite inspiring. And the last one that I think is really interesting is in the Middle East. I work with a lot of brands, and there's a lot of kind of interesting navigation of how you work through cultural differences, but there's a lot of investment in women's run races, finding the right gear and kit for elite sportswomen to run marathons, respectfully to their religions and cultures, and I think that's always quite inspiring to see. So it's different everywhere. Everywhere has growth, and there's lots of cultural navigations, but those are a few highlights for me.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks, Sam. And I want to pick up another question from the audience. And Leah, I'll start with you, but it sort of leads into the scientific side as well, asking, are you working on how to keep young girls in sport? I saw you nodding when Sam was talking about the ages, saying statistically 1 in 5 girls aged 10 to 16 consider dropping out due to period issues. Now, a number of sports have addressed this. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the answer is yes, that we're absolutely conscious of the dropout rates and always looking at ways to improve them. It's layered, like there's so many different reasons why girls fall out of love with sport, or maybe not even fall out of love, just choose to do something different. The biggest thing, I think, in our sport, in cricket, is just selling the social benefits of it. Obviously, there's lots of physical benefits to sport, but the social benefits are probably the most powerful. And we've got this beautiful game that goes for a really long time where people just sit around talking. So that's a really big selling point for us. And we're actually doing a piece of work with UTS at the moment on looking at our female pathway on girls aged between 13 and up, and looking at their experiences and hearing from them. I think a lot of administrators assume they have the answers, and a lot of the answers actually sit within the communities. So we're going out, I think we're about to release the findings of that study in January, but we've just done a bucket load of work on listening to kids, listening to their parents, and understanding what it is that they want and how can we improve it. And
how do you define what keeps girls in the sport when you go between participation and high performance?
I think they're kind of muddled, particularly at the younger age groups. We do talk a lot about pathways to participation and pathways to performance, but often when you're that 12, 13, 14-year-old kid, you're not really sure which one you're in. So the important thing is to make sure that we have a pathway that has lots of entry points, so that if you're a kid who's 13 and you really, really want to be an elite cricketer, but it just doesn't pan out that way, that there's still really good avenues for you to get involved in lots of different offerings. And likewise, you do get some late bloomers as well. So you might get some kids who just, take it up because their friends do or whatever, but get to the age of 15, 16 and go, actually, I'm really good. That happens. And you still need ways in which those types of kids can get back involved in the elite pathway as well. So I'd say that pathways to performance and participation, they're kind of, I can't do it with a microphone, but they weave in like that.
Absolutely. I think Katie and Libby, when we look at the pathway for female athletes when they get into a career, is part of your research involved in how to give longevity to those careers?
Maybe not specifically. I can't think of any specific projects at the moment, but I think maybe some of the things Katie was talking about in terms of like the interdisciplinary research and listening to different perspectives and that sort of thing is an area. You don't just focus on the physical, but actually listening to the opinions of the athletes and I guess the administrators as well. And that could be an area for future research. Are you aware of any others, Katie?
For female participation, and so I think, well, this is more or less from a research and probably from my own personal experience working with athletes at that transition point. So I don't know what the research says, but really, it's really hard for any athlete to, I suppose, leave high school and start their sort of high performance career. It's a big decision to make, and it's a time where you're going from what you're being told to do by your parents, by your school, and now it's like up to you to drive that. So one thing that I think was always really important with the female athletes I worked with was to sort of create that sense of belief in them and tell them, yeah, you can do this. And that is getting a much easier selling point these days, that it's, yeah, there is a career in this. Like, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we had female cyclists that would have to self-fund just to have the opportunity to race. Now they can have professional contracts and it's an actual career. So I think that selling point, and because this is going to be sexist, but I feel like girls are more sensible than boys. They're less like especially from the cyclists, a lot of the male athletes, they're just laser focused. I'm going to be in the pro peloton. Whereas the girls are like, but I need to make money. I need to do this and I need to think about my future career. So creating that belief in them that yes, this can be your career. And there is some really good research that I'm not doing, but is being done about sort of supporting female athletes through motherhood, supporting female athletes through even the early stages, like learning about your menstrual cycle, learning about what happens to your body as a female, like the AIS female women's or female health initiative. Like it's amazing. It's got all these free online resources that if you're a young athlete and you're like, is this normal? You can go there and it's got all this information, all these workshops and resources that you can reach out to. So I think some of those sticking points, like I don't want to do sport because of my period, they're really becoming less of a barrier for young girls now.
I think there's been a lot of baby steps. And it's very multifaceted, the reasons why girls or women drop out of sport. And there's baby steps, but there's a way to go. So, even, performing some of the research with the girls for Project 130, this is not part of our study design at all, but chatting to the girls, and these are some of the pathway girls that come through, and I just talked to the girls about, putting on markers, it takes a little while, and do you prefer one day or test match cricket? And one of the young girls said, well, I really prefer one day because then I don't have to wear my whites, because one day cricket usually has a coloured uniform, test cricket is usually all white. I said, oh yeah, and she said, yeah, it's really scary when you have your period. And I thought, oh, that's such a small thing that could change. And I really, in a similar vein, in netball, I've played netball for 30 years, and umpires have always worn all white, and they've changed the rules in the last couple of years that the umpires can wear black skirts if they want. So it's just those little, tiny little things. Katie mentioned some of the women or, girls and women thinking about how am I going to navigate maternity and that sort of thing. And there's more and more women's organisations that are paying maternity leave. Netball Australia pays maternity leave now. And that's such a huge, I've got a lot of personal connections in netball where people, maybe 10 or 15 years ago gave up their career to have children. And now you're seeing more and more and more examples of women having kids and coming back. And then you saw in the Matildas, they were going away as a camp. They had all their kids with them. It's lots of little baby steps. And somewhere in the near future, hopefully, we're putting all those puzzle pieces together to figure out how we can improve participation. And I think Sam made a really good point too about not just promoting the 0.0001% heroes, because you need to see yourself to think that you can do it, and literally almost no one is going to be that 0.001%.
I agree, and I think the other part of it is, there's been so much heat around Mary Fowler in the last year, as an example. How much pressure does that place on an athlete like Mary, or Annalise Perry, or anyone else who is in that 0.001% to be that role model for that many people? That's a lot of pressure on one individual athlete, let alone a team. I mean, the Matildas faced it, right? We talk about the Women's World Cup and all of these events. They've been carrying that weight of that responsibility since 2023. So as we build up these athletes and we tell their stories more, it's an incredible thing, but the spotlight has to be so diverse, because all these amazing developments and baby steps, it's also so vastly different across the sporting codes, what cricket needs, what netball needs, what football needs. The A-League women's is declining. Some of the A-League football athletes on the women's side are the least paid of any athletes in Australia. And we don't know, we can't see what they're going through, who's a parent, who's not a parent. And I really like what you're talking about, because it's about shedding the light on and not being afraid to, and taking the risk of saying, hey, we want to give more visibility to the things that are difficult, not just when it's polished and beautiful and we're there, because we actually won't get there if we don't give the visibility.
And that visibility really taps into the "if you can see it, you can be it" theme that I think you've all mentioned. We have a question here on inclusive sport, and it's around sport research, and does it transfer back to community and society by helping people with life issues or disabilities? Can sports science help people live better successfully?
Yes. So I guess within our school, for example, we have a clinical exercise physiology stream, and that is looking at exercise for clinical populations. So that's certainly one way that we're contributing. Like in terms of sport and high performance sport, unfortunately, there is a very low percentage of existing research in female athletes. There's also a very low percentage of existing research in athletes with different abilities. So that's definitely an area that is lacking, but something that can it help? Absolutely. And yeah, there's plenty of biomechanics that goes into, running blades and all of that sort of thing. You can tell I've got my biomechanics hat on, but Katie might have some other points to add.
Well, I was just thinking, how many people here have got a Fitbit or a Garmin heart rate monitor on? Without high performance sport, nobody would be wearing those now. A lot of the new cutting edge technology that was developed for a high performance sport environment does become business as usual for people every day. So, understanding what exercise people are doing, physical activity trackers, they were all, I suppose, pioneered in a more of a high performance sport setting. And I think one of the because I have worked a little bit with parasport as well. And one of the challenges researching in that space is that each para-athlete is such a unique individual. And so when we're talking about from a research perspective, where we're looking like, what can we generalize to somebody else? If I do some research on you, can I then think that the same outcome is going to happen on you? And what happens in parasport is obviously that is near impossible to have, because everybody's presenting with slightly different needs and slightly different strengths and response. But there's been some really cool research done, probably never published, but sort of particularly preparing para-athletes to tolerate with the heat, because again, it's all very specific and unique, and we do sort of not so much research, but a lot of, I suppose, intensive sports science preparing those athletes to compete.
Yeah, it's not just sports science research, but there's sports science servicing as well. And research really relies on looking for statistical significance, and that relies on large sample sizes so that we can have confidence in the results. And if you're working with athletes of different abilities, reaching that significance is often not possible. But just because it's not researched and in the literature doesn't mean that you can't service that with sports science. That's definitely a lot of what we do also.
Katie, there's a question here about the gap that we're seeing between the research into female sport and male sport. How do you see that?
Well, there's been a gap. Like we've started on the back foot. Back when I was starting early in my research career, it was really just research males, because it's going to sound bad, but they're easier, as in they don't have these hormonal fluctuations that you may need to control for, and that may be the reason why someone performs better or worse on a day. Luckily, thankfully, that is really changing, and we're getting a lot more research into female athletes and seeing, and also more importantly, I think realising, and Stacey Sims, I think is her name, has really made this popular. Females are not small men. And I think just that statement has been revolutionary in the way that people and researchers and funders and coaches, they are now seeing that we can't just see what happens in men and apply it directly to women. And I think that has just sort of been like the shift in mindset that we needed. And so it still does have its challenges, and there's still whole debates about how to best research in female athletes and just females in the general population. But I think we're on the track to making it much better and much more sort of inclusive.
Yeah, there's definitely historically a vast lack of female participants in sports science research. I was trying to memorise some stats before I did this. It was somewhere, there was a paper that looked at sports science research from 2000 to 2020, so in that 20 years, and female participants were very low, historically somewhere below 20%. And I think it's really a multifactorial issue in that, as Katie said, one of the issues, I guess, physiologically is that females are complex and scary, apparently, but and so it was sort of put in the too hard basket. We can't control that scary hormonal cycle, so we just won't do it at all. And then I think some of the other factors that contribute, it sort of stems back into participation and at all levels as well. So I spoke just previously about having sample sizes and having data sets and that sort of thing so that we can be confident in our results. So if we have a smaller pool to choose from, and then if you are then recruiting participants, you only get a small amount of those participants. So a smaller pool to choose from. Also, there's, sometimes we might do research on existing data sets. So male sport has been professional for a lot longer than female sport. generally in professional sport, there's a little bit more money, so you're doing monitoring, might be GPS monitoring or load monitoring or wellness scores or, performance tests. So there's databases that exist, and maybe women were a bit behind with that. So I think it's a big picture issue, and it's sort of everything bleeds into everything else.
Leah, you're looking way too relaxed. It's drinks break is over. You're back out in the middle. We have a few questions which pertain particularly to your field. One asking, what's the general age when it changes from participation, not to drop off, but to performance and professionalism, if you like?
Yeah, I'd say it really differs depending on the athlete. So we've got a young athlete at the moment, Kiva Bray, who's 16, who's tearing it up in WBBL. Phoebe Litchfield's the captain of the Sydney Thunder, and she came on the scene about the same age. But they are outliers. I would say that most women at the moment, the age is around sort of 19, 20, where they sort of step from being a pathway athlete into an elite athlete. But it is shifting. It is shifting to older. And that's a really good thing because it means athletes of my generation, we all retired when we were about 30 because we had to get serious about our day job and, pay the mortgage and all that sort of stuff. But because it's a viable career now, women are playing much later. And I was doing some research the other day on, what does our pathway need to look like going forward? What should it look like in 5 years, 10 years? And there's this real emerging layer in between sort of 19, 20, 21, 22, where these girls are coming out of our junior pathway, but they're not getting an elite contract. So what are we doing for them? They can't just be lost to the system, into the ether. We have to create programs that suit them. So I would say that the contract ages are getting older and older, and it's a beautiful thing.
And then when we look past that, what strategies do we need to get more to stay into other fields, into more practitioners, into sport, more coaches? What should we be doing?
I think it's sort of lots of things. I think the cohort of women who are going through as athletes, they're a really important group that we can recruit for future roles. That's part of it. So again, in my generation, you'd retire at 30 and then you'd go off and become a teacher or a nurse or something. But we're having these women who are staying involved in the sport now until they're 35, 37, 40, and then we'll have a secondary career in sport. And men have done that forever. A lot of the administrators, a lot of the coaches have been former athletes themselves who have had that transition. But because women were leaving so young, that hasn't occurred in women's sport. So I feel like there is going to be a wave coming through. But I also think it's tapping into what's happening in the community landscape and upskilling women who are running organisations, out in the community land who are doing wonderful jobs and letting them know that there's a next step for them as well. So making sure that we're, investing in people out in the community who can transition as well.
Somebody mentions about Holly Davidson became the first female referee to officiate an All Blacks game in their match against Wales. Do you feel like we're going to see more things like that, women on the big stage?
100%. Yeah, it's already happening in the officials. I think we've still got a little bit to go in terms of coaching. But it's one of those ones where it'll happen once and then the floodgates will open and people will go, why did this take so long? I always found that weird. I was a school teacher and I was teaching boys all through the day, and then I'd go and I'd coach boys cricket teams at night. And so it wasn't so weird for me because I'd just be coaching these kids at school and then I'd coach them again in a cricket setting. And in many ways, the cricket setting was so much easier than teaching sex ed during the day and things like that. But then I look back at that, and that was really rare. Like I tell people that I coached boys cricket when I was sort of in my early 20s, and they're like, "Oh, that's really different. That doesn't really happen. That's not the norm." And I just think it's just so bizarre, but it's because people just haven't seen it. It's just so different. But I truly believe that it'll take one woman, someone will see that, and then all of a sudden the floodgates will open because so many women will go, "Oh, I can do that too."
I think it's also really important for visibility in terms of acknowledging and promoting pathways into non-playing roles for women that aren't via being an athlete. That's, I think, something that is not being done so well. I think you're right, Leah, in that a lot of people that come into it are via, I'm a retired athlete, I want to stay in the sport. I spoke earlier in the year at a New South Wales Office of Sport. They had they've got the Play Her Way campaign, and they had a Careers for Girls in Sports Summit. So they've identified that, and the whole point of that summit was these are non-playing careers in sport. And, you know, they spoke to me as a sports scientist and a bunch of other people in administration roles, you know, marketing and that sort of thing, showing girls what other roles are out there in sport. You don't have to be an elite athlete to be involved in sport, and that way we're getting visibility and representation in all facets of sport.
And sorry to
You go
interrupt.
first.
I was going to say that's so true. Like I moved into coaching post-playing, and I learnt far more from being a school teacher on how to be a coach than I did from being a cricketer. Like all of the skills that I drew upon when I was coaching elite teams were from my teaching background. You know, the 4 or 5 years that I spent at university learning how to teach held me in good stead. So I think that's so important. But again, I think if you see examples of that, you know, the coach who didn't play, they're just a really wonderful coach. People will see that and as a role model and go, okay, like I can do that too.
I love what both of you have just said, because it also plays with the fact that people are sports fans as well as players and athletes, and so we're so encouraged, especially in this country, to participate in sport, but the elite pathway is not for everyone, and it's a smaller percentage. But one of my favorite examples is actually on the F1 grid at the moment. If there are any F1 fans in the room, the Haas race engineer for Esteban Ocon is the only female race engineer on the grid, and she is getting a lot of attention, and she's an amazing person, a friend of mine, and we met her and talked about it. But one thing that's quite interesting is she is an engineer. That was her trade, and now she finds herself in one of the most male-dominated sports in the entire world as the only female, speaking to the male athlete, guiding him on how to do race over race. And it's just such a brilliant example, because to your point about the floodgates, how many female engineers studying who are sports fans, who are maybe F1 fans, who might now set a dream to become an F1 Academy race engineer, or just see that they could be in the garage or be on the gun changing pit tires. That's an amazing pathway that now we're just very naturally seeing, because her face flashes up during a race 4 or 5 times when she's telling Esteban what to do. But there's so many more versions of that need to exist. I mean, even the work that all 3 of you are doing is point and proof of that.
We only have a few minutes left, and we've got 4 or 5 questions here that quite a few people want the answer to. So I'm going to ask you for perhaps abbreviated, but your feelings on these. Quite a few people want to know, should countries with poor human rights records against women or minority groups be allowed to host major international sporting events? Who would like to take that in 10 seconds or less?
That's you. That's all you.
Really putting me on the spot. I don't think I have the best answer for it, and I'm not going to make an attempt to make a crazy political statement. But I do think that the strategies behind decisions to host major tournaments and the legacy planning thereafter need to be bound in true fact and desire to see change. So if those values are aligning and those strategies and plans are being put into place, and then there's a genuine kind of commitment from those hosting bodies and organizations and the companies that are getting involved, then that's what we want to see in the world, is we want to see people making waves in this space.
And I think there's a lot of elements obvious to that, but I've travelled to places like Saudi a number of times to observe their female football program and to see the opportunities growing. So there are certain aspects. It's a multifaceted question. Thank you to everyone who put thumbs up for that question, which meant we really had to do it. Ladies, is there a double standard between women and male athletes for on-off-field standards of behaviour? Leah?
I think as the profile of female sport increases, there is going to be far more attention on the lives of female athletes and their public conduct. I think people, if they have a hero, if they have a person who they look up to, they want to see that person behaving well. And as more and more female athletes get idolised, I think that will follow.
Indeed. Folks, I've got ones here that actually relate very closely to what I wanted to ask you about your final thoughts for our audience, and perhaps with thanks to Ness, who's organised this today, we can get some answers out to the rest of the group on the other questions. But there's a couple of questions here about getting your foot in the door. And I wanted to ask you what your takeaway would be to the group here from each of you. Another one about created a proposal to promote equitable access for women in motorsport, which you just referred to, without industry connections. How can I effectively pitch it and be taken seriously? One's about, is it who you know? How do you get into these careers? So from your perspective, what do you want to tell our audience online and in the room about how to be who you want to see? Did that make sense? Kind of? Yeah. Nope. Who'd like to start?
Oh, I can have a go to kick us off. I think the biggest one is it doesn't, like a bit of industry experience. Like we do lots of recruitment and appointments at Cricket New South Wales, and a real separator is like real world experience. So it doesn't have to be that you're an athlete, or it doesn't have to be that you've worked in sport before, but if you've volunteered somewhere, if you can show that you're really passionate through some real world experience volunteer stuff, that can be a real separator.
Katie?
I think my biggest piece of advice is don't not do something just because you're the only girl in the room. And that was been my approach and philosophy. I'm often the only girl, and I've never ever once let it bother me, and in fact I've used it as my advantage throughout my whole career.
Sam?
My favourite thing to do when I meet new people is to ask them what their story is. I can tell where I'm a storyteller. And my best example of this is actually to you, Steph, because when I came back to Australia from living overseas for a long time, I asked Steph to come join a panel we were hosting during the World Cup, and I chased her down afterwards while she was trying to escape. And I said, can I take you to lunch? I'd just like to pick your brain about your story. And since that moment that we went to lunch, she has opened doors for me all over the sporting industry in Australia. So I think for me, the biggest thing that has changed my entire career is sitting down with people I admire that I'm interested in, asking them what their story is, and not necessarily always with an ulterior motive or a goal, but just genuine curiosity about that person. And particularly in sport, you never know when you're going to, I'd love to do a documentary on the research you guys are doing, but you never know who you're going to meet and what it's going to inspire. So ask people their stories.
Can I just say, after I heard Sam's story, I wanted to be Sam, and then I topped it off by throwing my coffee all over her, which was unintentional, but memorable, clearly. Sam, thank you. Libby?
All right, so I think a big piece of advice getting your foot in the door is, I really think, have your sights set on your interests rather than chasing a particular job. I think that was reflected in all of our opening stories, is that we chased our interests. I didn't know what my job was when I left school. Chase your interests and see where that takes you, rather than having a preconceived idea of what the job is. And I think just stay curious and interested and say yes a lot when opportunities come.
I was just going to ask if I can go full Australian and say, have a crack. Just have a go. What are you losing if you don't? I mean, I've had, as I said, 6 jobs so far, and I'll get to my real job one day. No, but you're going to find something that you love, and you'll find a part of something that you love that you can really pursue. And then, as the old cliche goes, if you're doing something you love, you don't work a day in your life. So look for that one. Go into sports media, it's great. Ladies, you've been absolutely amazing, and it's been wonderful to share just a piece of your stories, your pathways and your journeys, so thank you very much indeed. And folks, can I ask you to please show your appreciation for Dr. Libby, Sam, Dr. Katie and Leah. Thank you very much for everyone who's joined us. Thank you to Ness for organising today, and I hope to see all of you out there pursuing your passions into the future. Thank you for joining us on Global Game Changers.